Well, I think we'll get underway. Hopefully we'll be able to identify where Councillor Cowan and Councillor Bowring have got to. So firstly, welcome to all present to the first virtual meeting of the Wokingham Borough Council Planning Committee. This is the meeting obviously of the 13th of May. The April meeting was cancelled. I don't need to go through the normal preamble because we don't have a live audience present, but I will just confirm for those listening in that the Planning Committee at Wokingham Borough consists of 11 elected members, borough councillors, who represent all 4 political groups on Wokingham Borough Council. We're also supported tonight by officers in the form of Mary Severin, the Borough Solicitor, who's there to give us legal advice, Callum Wernham, who is the Democratic Services Officer and Clerk to this committee meeting, Councillor Chris Bowring, the Vice Chairman, myself, Simon Weeks, the Chairman, Justin Turvey, who's the Planning Team Manager, and Judy Kelly, the Highways Development Manager. And the planning officers, individual planning officers, will be presenting each item. In terms of the actual process tonight, we have asked those that might normally have attended the meeting to present in person to submit any submissions they have in advance. And we have only had submissions directly in the case of the first item, that's the Twyford application, and a late entry for GTO engineering, which has been circulated to members. So we have all the information. And of course, members of the public, whether they be supporters, applicants or objectors, have also had the opportunity to submit their comments during the process of consultation. Next thing I'd just like to go through is, as this is a new technology for most of us, and certainly for the Planning Committee, is the protocol that we will use. And that is a key item on here, is to recognise that when you're not speaking, please ensure that your microphone is muted, and for obvious reasons, reverse that when you are speaking. Because at any given time I can't see all of you together, it will be difficult for me to tell individually who is indicating they want to speak on any item. So what I'm planning to do is to go alphabetically through the Planning Committee members, asking each member in turn after the presentations whether they wish to speak, and trying to address those, get any answers for them, and we'll then move on to the next member. And to avoid any repetition, we will actually reverse the sequence in which we go round for each application. So, for instance, I think on this first application, of course, Chris Bowring would normally be the first speaker, but the next one round it would be reversed, which so happens to be me, but I will probably leave my comments till the end. So before we go any further, do any members have any questions about the process and procedure? Okay, right. Okay, so thank you for your forbearance. Have we confirmed the presence of all members of the committee yet, please?
No, Chair. I think we're still waiting on Councillor Chris Bowring. He hasn't managed to join yet, so we might need to hear the second item first, if that's your wish. Okay.
All right. Yeah, I suspect that will be the case unless he's joined us by then. Okay, so coming on to the agenda itself, we have no apologies given, but we're currently missing Councillor Bowring and Councillor Cowan. Is that correct?
I think Gary might be here now, Chair.
I'm here. I don't know if anybody can hear me or see me.
Thank you, Gary. Yep, that's great. We can hear you. Did you hear my preamble, Gary?
Yes, I did, Simon. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're just awaiting Councillor Bowring now. Okay, minutes of the previous meeting. This was, of course, a meeting that was held in March. I was not present at that meeting, so this matter would normally be handled by the Vice Chairman, who we're awaiting. Did members have any errors or corrections from the March minutes?
No.
Simon, Gary, I've got one observation on page 9, and that it says there are 3 additional conditions resolved by the committee. I would have liked to have seen the wording of that within this agenda. Otherwise, it's fine.
Okay. Callum, as clerk, would you be able to resolve that for us?
Yes, Chair, I can expand on that, as is your wish.
Thank you. And that's before but apart from that, there are no objections?
No,
Right.
nothing from me.
No, it's fine.
Okay, so we will confirm those minutes by signing them once those three additional conditions are actually included within the agenda. So thank you for that. Moving on then, I assume, Justin, can you confirm that all the items on the agenda are to be heard tonight, that none have been deferred or withdrawn?
That's correct, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. And in that case, I will just have one final check. Has Councillor Bowring joined us?
Chairman, it's
Yes.
Stephen here. I wonder whether I may just make a suggestion. In the event that Chris Bowring isn't able to join us, obviously we can't simply defer the first item. Could I suggest that perhaps if you do decide to move it down the agenda, if we get to the point where it's obvious Chris is not joining us, we nominate Angus Ross as the most experienced member of the committee to act as chair for that item.
Okay. I think that's an excellent suggestion. Angus, could you just confirm that you were present at the March meeting? Hello, Angus?
Probably tell him to unmute himself.
Yeah. Angus, we can't hear you. Are you on mute? Okay, well, it's a great start. We appear to have lost somebody. I take your point, Stephen, and I think that would be a sensible and pragmatic approach to it. But hopefully Councillor Bowring will join us. So my intention is, since he hasn't joined us yet, that we will go straight on to item 106.
Chairman, can I...
Callum and Justin, does this present any issues in terms of the officers being present for their particular applications, since we're changing the order?
Sorry, Simon.
Chairman.
Oh, sorry, Simon. This is Callum. Can we just do declarations of interest, please?
My apologies. Sorry, I did miss that. Could members please indicate whether they have any declarations of interest on any of the items on this evening's agenda? Right, I hear no one indicating, so we'll assume, Callum, that you can record that as no declarations of interest were stated. One final thing, sorry, just before we get into the agenda, I would like to mention is if any member loses their internet connection and basically drops out of the meeting for more than a couple of minutes, we will require you not to participate in the discussion or the vote on that item, because you will have only heard part of the presentations. All members understand that? I have to say, being in rural Finchamstead with an appallingly low internet speed, I fear I'm the most likely to drop out, but hopefully we'll hold together until then. Right, so without further ado, we will go on to the planning application on page 57, which is GTO engineering, and we'll hand straight over to the officer handling this. And as I say, could members ensure they're all muted now, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Hope everyone can hear me. I'm just going to share my screen with my PowerPoint presentation. Can everyone see that okay, just to confirm?
Yes.
Yes.
To start with then, the proposed development is for the demolition of existing buildings on the site and the erection of a new workshop building for the service and restoration of motor vehicles, which is a class as a B2 use, with also ancillary storage as well. Just moving on to the location plan, the site, as you can see, is outlined in red. The cursor on the screen at the moment is where which I refer to the main building is, and this is the building that's going to be retained, and also the building you can see from Bath Road, which will become apparent through some of the photos. This is just an aerial photo to show the site in a bit more context. You can just see Bath Road here where the cursor is. You can just about make out the main building here. The proposed building will be located just here. There's an existing building there to be demolished, and you can probably just see some of the other buildings which are going to be demolished to make way for the proposal. And this is just a slightly more zoomed in picture, again with the main building here to the lower part of the photo, and the proposed building will be going just here. This is a photograph from Bath Road, and you can just see the neighbouring garden centre entrance there. And once again, you can see the what I would consider the main building, which kind of has a sort of domestic appearance to the front elevation, which is actually quite an attractive building. And there's a flat roof, sort of 1970s extension to the rear, which you can't really see anywhere from public viewpoints. This is from Bath Road looking the other way. The main entrance to the site is just to the left of the picture there. There is another access on the site which I don't believe is used for main vehicles. This one tends to be the sort of main vehicular access. This is the start with the top left picture. This is from London Road looking straight into the site, and that's the access which isn't really used. And once again, you can see the main building there, and you can also see the tree screening as well, which is quite important to note. Moving on to the bottom right hand picture, you can just see the side elevation of the main building there. This is taken from the garden centre, and once again you can note there is quite extensive tree cover on the site as well. So this is the proposed and existing site plan. The sort of areas which they're actually hatched in red, but they come across pink on the screen, but the pink buildings are the ones going to be demolished. And you can just see the footprint of the proposal behind it. And once again, it sits behind the main building there, and is fairly well tucked away. These are the elevations. The south elevation is the one which will front onto Bath Road. It's a relatively discreet building. The eaves height's approximately 3 metres, with the sort of main pitch being approximately 6 metres. And as you can see, it sort of has this dual span roof with valleys and pitches to keep the height down. And once again, these are just the other elevations which are very similar. This is the proposed floor plan. This is you can probably just make out the cars. So this would be the main workshop area to the left, and there's some storage rooms to the right. So this is to show the proposed extension in relation to the main building. And as you can see there, the top slide, I would just refer to members that building is set quite substantially back from the front elevation. So although it's a flat perspective, it wouldn't quite look as prominent as that. And if you go to the middle slide, you can see the low eaves height in relation to the main building. It's sort of single story at eaves height. And also you can see the sort of pitch of the roof in relation to the main building as well. The bottom slide is really just the schematic drawing to show the general sort of scale of the other buildings proposed to be demolished. Before I move on to the next slide, members may have read from the committee report that there was a previous appeal decision which was dismissed, and I'll just show you that now quickly. So this is the appeal decision which was dismissed and we recommend refusal on, and I'll flick back to the other screen in a minute, but there's quite a marked difference in terms of what's proposed. First of all, this was a 2-storey building with a flat roof. The design of the building as well was very sort of modern business park orientated, and if you can see from the middle slide, you can just see the sort of eaves of the flat roof in relation to the eaves of the property there, and it sticks quite a fair way up above that. We felt, regardless of any volume increase, we felt that the design of it was quite jarring with the character of the area and also the main building. So flicking back to the proposal now, you can see it's a much more discreet building, much smaller, and in our view would sit much more comfortably on the site. Before I conclude the presentation, there were a couple members' updates which I'll just point out for you now. One of them was to include the previous appeal decision, so I hope members have had a good look at that. The vice chairman, if he's logged on yet, asked a question about what the percentage increase would be in relation to the main building being retained, and as worked out, it would be 90% of the size of the main building which is being retained. But as I've said throughout the report, the actual net increase of built form on the site would be zero. So there would be a zero net increase of built form overall. The chairman also asked a question about condition 2 and whether we should or could restrict the use in case the proposed business was to say branched out into say sort of demolishing and car breaking and that sort of thing. Having looked at condition 2, in my view, where it restricts it to car restoration and repairs, I think if there was anything of that nature going on site, that would be, in my view, a material change of use and it wouldn't be ancillary. There is generally a common misconception with case law ancillary, but ancillary doesn't necessarily mean basically if a use is small, if it's a different use period, then that's a change of use regardless of the size of it. Ancillary just means offsets from the proposed use. So for example, an ancillary use to the current proposal would be, say, an office space for the business. If they ventured in the car breaking, that would be something different, and in my view would be a material change of use that would need permission. So to conclude, Chairman, the recommendation is to approve the application subject to a legal agreement securing an employment skills plan and also the recommended conditions as well. I'll just hand you back the screen now and I'll be happy to answer any further questions.
Okay, thank you, Mark, for a very clear and succinct presentation. I believe I'm correct in saying some members of the Planning Committee have visited this before. I know that Rochelle and myself have. Did any other members go on a previous site visit here a few years ago?
Simon Gary,
welcome.
no, I haven't gone on a site visit, but I do know the site from usage in the past, so I do know it.
All right, thank you. I think the key thing here is that the previous refusals were clearly appropriate, and obviously when challenges appeal, they were found that our refusals were appropriate. I think because the building is now single story and is well set back from the road, because as we saw from the site plan, all the buildings are actually quite some way back set into the overall site. And the single story nature of the building is far less intrusive than the last proposal that was refused. And I think that the overall, there's no net increase in floor area or volume, which also means the site is, if you like, tidied up. So I think this is quite a good, clear planning application. We have clear guidance from the officers, and we also have the strength of a quite definitive planning inspector's report that has helped guide both the applicant and ourselves to, after probably 3 or 4 years of negotiation, to reach something that certainly appears acceptable. Now, we don't have any ward member present, but I will go through the committee, as I said, in order, alphabetical order, to see whether each and every person has a comment. Could you please confirm when I call you whether either yes or no that you do have a comment, so that we know that you've actually heard my request. So I'll start with, firstly, I'll go to Stephen Conway, who is an adjacent ward member. Stephen, what would you like to say, if anything, about this application?
The only thing I'd like to say, Chairman, is that I think everything I was going to say you've said already. I support the officer recommendation.
Okay, thank you. Gary Cowan.
Simon Gary, I've got no comment to make, and I do support the officer recommendation.
Okay, thank you. Carl Duran.
Thanks,
Hello,
Chair.
Carl.
Yeah, sorry.
Good evening, Carl.
I unmuted something wrong, but I'm back. I'm here now. Yes, just a couple of questions, really. The parish council requested a landscaping scheme with screening from the A4. Now, I noticed that condition 5 is landscaping, but it doesn't specifically mention that. I'm just wondering whether that's part of the plan, whether that's been incorporated into that condition, or even if it's required. I mean, my view of the diagrams and the photos and so on, it looks like it's quite a long way back and is quite well screened already. But I just wanted to ask that. And the second question is condition 2. Does this effectively restrict them from doing anything outside the buildings, or is it particularly related to what they're using the buildings for? They must stick to that, and well, I'm kind of bothered about them doing the same thing they're doing in the building outside the buildings. Obviously, there seems to be some idea of breaking and so on. It will be a material change of use, but if they're doing the same thing outside, that wouldn't be a problem, I take it.
Okay, all right. Well, we'll go to Mark for answers to those. So, Mark, could you answer, please, Councillor Duran's question on landscaping, and also could you just provide a little more detail, because you'll know that I had previously expressed concern that the category of use, whilst in this case is being used for the repairs and restoration to motor vehicles, could actually be used for probably a less acceptable use in the greenbelt in the form of something, as I think I described as an example, car braking or something like that. Could you just, as I say, answer those 2 points? Thank you.
Yeah, in terms of the first question in regard to landscaping, my view is that it wouldn't be required to specifically say it needs to screen the development from Bath Road. I think it will be relatively well screened from that viewpoint in any case. So I think a general sort of landscaping condition is sufficient in this instance. With regard to condition 2, yes, condition 2. Ultimately, for expediency, we didn't want to consider a sort of broad brush B2 use, because that would have caused the applicant to submit a lot of information. So we just considered the use proposed, which is why we've restricted it, because B2 does cover quite a broad church of proposals, as members will be aware. So we felt it was appropriate to condition it specifically to the applicant. With regard to the proposal, as I said in the introduction, my view is that if they did sort of branch out into anything, say, away from that, and the chairman gave the example of car braking, in my view, that would be a material change of use. I don't think you could do it ancillary under that condition. That would be my view. So they would need planning permission for that. There was a sort of secondary element to that question in terms of can they use, or what can they use the outdoor space for? We haven't restricted the outdoor space. One of the reasons being is because they can currently use that, so they can use it for storage. And I believe the previous owners of the site was Maltby, I think, who made sort of steel, I think they made bridges.
Maybe bridges.
Yeah, and I've seen photographs from when they were on site with substantial storage outside of those buildings and around the site. So there has been storage there and work outside the buildings previously, which had permission. So we need to be mindful of that. And once again, they haven't proposed that. So in my view, because what's proposed and what's gone on before, I feel that condition is sufficient and robust enough to ensure that what members approve it is what happens. And if anything additional goes on, then potentially they would need planning permission. But there's nothing restricting them using the outside of the buildings. But in our view, it's not appropriate to do that, or not. It wouldn't sort of meet the 6th test of conditions.
Okay. Is that okay, Carl?
Yeah, thanks for that. I'm broadly in favour of it as well. Extra
right,
jobs
okay.
as well. Great stuff.
Yeah, I think it's also just worth pointing out that GTO Engineering specialise in the restoration of very expensive and exotic cars, and I think the likelihood of GTO Engineering deciding to become a car breakers is probably minimal. I don't really think that's the market they operate in, at least in a more discreet fashion, possibly. Right, carrying on through members. Pauline Jorgensen, do you have anything to add?
No, Simon, I'm quite happy with this, and it's a great improvement on the previous one.
All right, thank you. Councillor Abdul Loys, do you have anything to add, Abdul?
Thank you, Chairman. The word car braking has been used quite several times. Does B2 comes under that?
Sorry, I didn't understand the question, I'm afraid.
You have to speak up a bit, Abdul.
Sorry, the word car braking came along quite a few times in this conversation. Does B2 comes under that?
It probably would do, yes. The only reason car braking came up is I think the chairman was just, given a hypothetical of what could happen. That's just to be absolutely clear. That's not proposed. And as was mentioned, GTO restore classic cars, and from what we've seen on site and other officers, what they do is actually very forensic. It's not your sort of what I would call a normal car repair place. It's a very sort of forensic operation they run there.
Sorry, Simon, can I just add something? If I may? Yeah, on its own, a car breaker's yard would be a sui generis use. So as Mark says, it would be a change of use if it was solely a car breaker's yard. So the permission wouldn't cover that on its own.
Thank you,
Abdul?
Chair. Yeah.
Okay, right, thank you. Andrew Mickleborough?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I have two questions. I am minded to support the officer's recommendations, and I am very pleased that the reasons cited by the planning inspectorate for previously refusing the appeal seem to have been addressed. But I have two questions. If approved, a parking plan would have to be agreed. Given there's an anticipated increase in staff of 22 and that this is a green belt, I would have liked to have seen details of impacts on parking of additional staff and presumably additional customers. But in the absence of this, would officers expect that there'll be a requirement for additional car parking spaces? There's reference to removal of some hard standing elsewhere. Can officers assure us that any increasing parking demand could be provided without an overall net increase in hard standing and without affecting the visual amenity of the area? The second question pertains to landscaping and trees, and I know that a lot has already been said about this. I appreciate that one of the concerns about this site is the wish to maintain a feeling of openness. And I assume that this and the large number of trees that we saw in one of the photographs by the entrance to the site is the reason why there's no requirement for additional trees to be planted to provide screening of the buildings and possibly car parking. I'd be very interested on members' views about whether any additional screening should be included, particularly in those parts of the site which I've not visited that are away from the entrance to the site. And if officers could advise whether it would be permissible to include a requirement to plant additional trees for screening purposes on a greenbelt site where preserving openness is a consideration. Okay.
All right. Thank you, Andrew, for a couple of detailed questions. Mark, could you comment, please, on the adequacy of the proposed parking in view of the fact they will be employing more people, and also the comments of the trees and landscape officer in terms of whether the current planting and tree cover is considered adequate? Over to you.
Yes, so with regard to the parking, in condition 5, which is the sort of general landscape condition, I have included car parking layouts to be included within those details. One of the reasons we are quite relaxed about car parking on site is because there is actually a substantial amount of parking already on there. From the aerial photos, there is a significant car park, which I think is a leftover from the previous owners of the site, which from when I visited the site is quite far off being used to its full potential. So there is quite significant hard standing on the site for car parking, and in my view they would easily be able to accommodate any additional parking on there. I think the numbers were approximately 20 additional staff, so I think that could easily be done. And once again, we have included it as a condition, so I believe that can be accommodated without affecting the sort of green nature of the site. With regard to additional trees and sort of your concern about maintaining openness, I think it goes back to the previous question I had insofar as that we feel the building's acceptable in its own right in greenbelt terms, and it doesn't there isn't a requirement for additional trees to make it acceptable. Like I say, as with all schemes, we have put a landscaping condition on there, and it's appropriate to sort of provide landscaping and sort of soften the edges of the building. But I don't think it's necessary in this instance to be so prescriptive in terms of, trees need to be here to sort of block views on it, block certain views of it, because it will be relatively discreet.
Okay, Andrew, you okay with those responses?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, fine, thank you. Malcolm Richards.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just a fairly simple question. The new building is going in a different place to the existing one, but it says on the application, full application for the erection following demolition of existing workshop. Is it following? In other words, do they have to knock down the existing workshop before they're allowed to start building the new one? I would have thought normally you build a new one and then knock down the old. Which way is it meant to be? Any idea? Because if you knock it down, how are they going to function during the building?
Yeah. Okay, Mark, could you clarify?
Yes, condition 15 basically states that they can't occupy the building until the other buildings have been demolished. But obviously, yeah, the building is on the footprint of an existing building, so logic dictates that they would have to demolish that prior to erecting the proposal. But some of the other buildings are located a reasonable distance from that. So potentially they could erect the building and leave the other buildings, which is why we've included condition 15 to ensure all the buildings that they've said they're going to removed are removed.
Okay, thank you very much.
Should we knock down is just a question of what order, but I have no problem with this and I'm minded to support it.
Okay, thank you, Malcolm. Angus Ross. Hello, Angus. We seem to have lost Angus, so we'll carry on to Rochelle Shepherd-Debay.
I'm basically in favor of the officer's recommendation. I also like to commend them for increasing the employment in the borough, especially considering how many jobs are going to be lost from the pandemic. So overall, it seems like a good idea at this point.
Okay, thank you, Rochelle. I will just come back to Councillor Angus Ross. Angus, are you with us? I'm not sure whether we've lost Angus Ross, but on the basis that all members have spoken, I will just ask whether anybody wishes to ask any further questions.
Chairman.
Sorry, was that Angus?
No, it's Stephen. I'm sorry, okay. Chairman. I think Angus is there, but his microphone, for whatever reason, isn't working. So he's trying to speak to us, but we can't hear him.
Right.
And that potentially, I'm afraid, negates my earlier suggestion about how we may handle item 105, because if we can't hear somebody who's been nominated as chair, that presents us with a difficulty.
I suggest we cross that when we get to the point. Then we'll know what we're actually dealing with in terms of. We'll know. Excuse me. We'll know what we're dealing with in terms of Councillor Ross being able to speak and whether Councillor Bowring's been able to join us. Okay, Rochelle.
We can do a chat. We can do a chat if necessary. There's a chat function on here. He could chat on that, and somebody could read it out.
Yeah. Okay. Well, as I say, we'll wait until we need to get to there. So, firstly, just one more request to Angus Ross. Angus, are you able to speak with us? Does anyone have an image of Angus? Because I don't.
I have had an image of him, yes.
Yeah, he's disconnected and then came back on again.
Right.
He is there, but unfortunately he is trying to speak. But there's something wrong with
Angus, I have no idea whether you can hear us, but if you can you indicate whether you're content with this application visually?
Here he is.
Here he is. I have a blank screen. Angus. I'm getting up. Right, okay. So a little unorthodox an approach, but clearly that's working fine.
Can you hear me now?
I'm going to put this now.
Can hear you now.
Yeah, I'm going to put this now to the vote because all members have had an opportunity to have their say on this. I'm just going to do what we did before. All members have actually indicated as we've gone round that they would be willing to support this. could I just have some guidance whether I need to ask that question specifically, or whether I could ask any member who does not wish to support it to indicate? Callum, could you give us some guidance on that?
Yes, Chair. No, I think your suggestion is fine, so long as no other member indicates in the next few seconds.
Okay, so I will put it to the committee that we accept the recommendation on this planning application, providing no member indicates in the next 10 seconds or so they don't wish to do so.
For clarity, can you hear me now, Angus?
Yes, yes, we can hear you, Angus. Thank you. Whatever you've done, it's worked. Okay, so members, on that basis, the planning application number is 193047, and that item is unanimously approved by those present at tonight's committee. Thank you. So first item successfully handled. Before we move on to the next item, Callum or Madeline, are you able to confirm whether Councillor Bowring has been able to join the meeting or has been tracked down?
He's been tracked down, Chair. Unfortunately, he's having some issues with connectivity with Teams this evening, so it doesn't look like he's going to be able to join us at the moment.
Okay, all right, okay. Hopefully he might be able to persevere. Right, so we now move on to the planning application on page 79, which is planning application 193356, which is for a development of 5 detached dwellings in Swallowfield. Now, before we come on to this, members will have noticed in their reading of the agenda that this is actually only at the panel tonight for a technicality. It's recommended for approval. A planning inspector has said it is fine for approval, providing the relevant legal agreements are produced, and that is now in hand. So I hope we don't need to spend too much time on the application because we've got very clear guidance from the planning inspector from a previous decision on this. So just to confirm to members, the reason it is at the planning committee tonight is solely because the site is greater than 1 hectare. And under our planning, the constitution, we have to bring any sites for greater than 1 hectare to the planning committee for decision, even though this particular application is supported, it has no objections from residents, the parish council or the local ward member, and is fully supported by both the inspector's guidance and the council's recommendation. So Senjuti, we'll go straight over to you. So could you give us a brief summary on this application? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll share my screen now. Can you see it?
Yes.
Yes, that's fine.
Yes.
Thank you. So the application number is 193356. This application is for the proposed erection of 5 number detached houses. And as the chairman said, this is presented to committee because it is a major development of more than 1 hectare site area. So this is the site location plan. The site is located on western side of Basingstoke Road and to the southwest of Swallowfield Village and within designated countryside. A linear development of residential properties along Basingstoke Road, so you can see here, characterizes the immediate neighborhood. And this is the aerial photograph of the site. As you can see, it's quite barren, and these are the existing residential properties along the road. These are the photos of the site from Basingstoke Road. So that's the entrance. This is the entrance, as you can see. And these are the photos of the street scenes from either side of the site. So on the top photograph where the cursor is, that's the entrance. And in the bottom photograph, that's the entrance point to the site. Now, the site has a long planning history, including an extent permission for a similar scheme and a recent appeal dismissal. So here are the site plans of most recent residential proposals on this site that kind of provide precedent for the current application. So in 2016, an outline application for 3 detached dwellings with 1 access and a balancing pole was approved that established the principle of residential development within this countryside plot. In 2019, a scheme of 5 dwellings were approved, where 2 pairs of semi-detached properties were proposed in place of 2 large detached houses of the outline scheme. And this approval from 2019, numbered 173726, it provides the fallback position for the current application. Now, the extent permission 173726 included a Section 106 legal agreement securing various planning obligations, including TBH SPA contributions, affordable housing contributions, and plans for an ecological enhancement area. However, prior to its determination, the applicants applied for a new permission, reference number 182370, which proposed 5 detached houses and 2 independent accesses from Basingstoke Road. This proposal was supported by a viability report where the applicant claimed lack of financial viability to make affordable housing contributions. The application wasn't determined within time, and a non-determination appeal was made by the applicant. The appeal was determined by written refs procedure. The appeal was dismissed solely on lack of legal agreements securing planning obligations ground. The inspector didn't object to the proposal on any other issues, including principle of residential development with countryside, impact on character of the area, and sustainability. So this is the proposed site plan for the current application. As can be seen, the plans are same as the previous application, that is 182370. The only difference is that the applicant has agreed to provide full affordable housing contribution in this instance. So these are the proposed plans and elevations of the large detached property, which is known as plot number 1. These are the plans and elevations for plot 2. These are the plans and elevations for plot 3. These are the plans and elevations of plot 4. And these are the plans and elevations for plot 5. So as you can see, all 5 houses are proposed to have similar but individual designs. And here is a comparison between the extent permission and the current proposal. Since the current scheme proposes 5 detached properties and 2 separate accesses, the scheme would result in an additional 250 square meters of plot coverage, which is about 2% more than the extent permission. This is not considered to have any additional harm to the character of the countryside. Moreover, detached properties are considered more in keeping with the neighboring character than semi-detached houses. The inspector didn't consider the additional built-up area to be harmful to the character of the area, including countryside. The proposal doesn't have any other issues, including trees and landscape, ecology, archaeology, or flooding and drainage. So as such, it is recommended that the committee authorizes the head of development management to grant planning permission on completion of legal agreement and subject to conditions within the officer report. Thank you, Chair. I will now hand it back to you.
Right, thank you, Sanjuti. Very detailed presentation. Members, as I said in my introduction, this is something that I don't believe will be controversial. I think it would have been controversial if it had come forward again claiming not to be able to provide affordable housing. But you'll see that that is detailed on page 80 in the part of the recommendation, which details the sum of money, which is the standard sum of money determined by our housing people for affordable housing of this related to this size development. And I mentioned that there was no objections. In fact, I think there's 3 letters or 3 comments of support from neighbours. So I hope we can keep our comments on this fairly brief, and I will just go round in reverse order. But before I do that, we've seen that there have been delays previously on resolving the legal agreements. We see this quite often when an applicant seems to balk at signing legal agreements which require the payment of a sum of money. So I was going to suggest a modification that I hope members would support of the recommendation, and that is basically to put a timescale on conclusion of the legal agreement, and that legal agreement should be agreed within 3 months of this date of this hearing. So I'd be interested to just members could perhaps indicate whether they would support that as we go around. So firstly, I'll come to Rochelle Shepherd-Debay.
I have no objection since it's basically close enough to the original application.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Angus Ross.
I've got no objection at all and approve your amendment. And I do hope it's the last time we see an application for this site.
It's certainly been around a long time. Thank you. Next, Malcolm Richards.
Yes, I have no objection to this application, and I also agree with the modification that you've made to the time limit for the approval.
Thank you, Malcolm. Councillor Andrew Mickleborough.
Yes, I have no objection, and I support the condition that you're seeking to attach to this.
Thank you, Andrew. Councillor Abdul Loys.
So I have no objection, Chair. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Abdul. Councillor Pauline Jorgensen.
No objection, Simon, and I agree with the proposal.
Thank you. Councillor Carl Duran.
Hi, Chair. I support the application and also your amendment.
Thank you. Councillor Gary Cowan. Hello, Councillor Gary Cowan.
Hello. Sorry, I had pressed the wrong button.
Okay.
I support the recommendation and your proposed amendment. I have one observation though, and that's paragraph 39 on page 96, the AWRE. There's two elements to it. One is there's a cumulative impact should more and more development happen in the area. And to my knowledge, there's a new directive from on AWE about Burfield, and I'm just wondering whether this report reflects that or whether it reflects the old one.
Are you asking whether it reflects the views of the old director or the new director, or a new policy?
A new policy was brought out by the government, which was in the support of an EU direction on the AWE, and that affects Burfield. I don't think there's any implications for this application. I just want to make sure that our report reflects the latest legislation and not a previous one. It's just a point of tidying up, nothing more.
Okay, I'll just put that question. Sen Duty, obviously this application has been around quite a while. Have we relied on original comments from AWRE, or have they been consulted on this more recent application as well?
No, Chair, we didn't consult for this latest application because they had never raised any objection on the previous schemes. So it kind of, we took it for granted that they will not have any objection this time as well. However, if needed, I can go back and check with them.
And Chairman, would you mind if I jumped in briefly?
Yes, sure, Justin, go ahead.
In answer to Gary's point, so that the standing advice as we sit here today is what the application's been assessed under, and it doesn't need consultation. It may be in the future that it would require further consultation, but it wouldn't make it unacceptable. It may be that there's just a condition in relation to an evacuation plan, for example. So even if we had new advice, it's unlikely that the scheme would be unacceptable.
Okay. Gary, does that address your concern?
Yeah, I'm just talking about the tidying up, make sure the documentation and the approval is compliant with legislation, no more, no less. I'm perfectly happy.
And Justin Turvey has just confirmed that to us. It's the current legislation we have to base it on.
Well, if he's satisfied it's compliant with the current legislation, which is to do with, as you mentioned, evacuation, and it's compliant with that, then fine. But I have no problem with it at all.
Okay. Thank you, Gary. Finally, Councillor Stephen Conway.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm happy to support the application and your proposal of a time limit on the signing of the legal agreement.
All right. I'll bring this to conclusion now. So
Simon, sorry to interrupt. Can I just briefly interrupt you on a point, Simon?
Please.
Just on your proposed amendment, I hear what you say. Would it be possible to add the caveat, unless agreed otherwise by the planning manager, just in the event that the 3 months is genuinely not achievable?
Well, I'm struggling to see, when it's been around for quite so long, why it would not be achievable within 3 months, even allowing for the exceptional circumstances that we're all in at the moment. Okay, what I would agree to then is in agreement between the planning manager and the chair of the planning committee. Okay.
That's fine. I mean, the difficulty is if we refuse it automatically after 3 months, you'll end up seeing this application again in 6 months.
Indeed, but it would have to join a queue because there's obviously a lot of applications that are around at the moment. And I'm sure the applicant doesn't particularly want it to come back to committee again. So I think we need to keep a little bit of focus with the applicant on getting this concluded and moved off our pending tray, so to speak. So members, with those comments, so a minor modification to the recommendation to say that it must be, the legal agreement must be concluded within 3 months unless specifically agreed by the planning manager and myself. Would you please indicate whether you're able to support that? I shall work my way round in the same order as I went round before. Councillor Rochelle Shepherd-Debay?
Yes, I support the...
Councillor Angus Ross?
Support.
Councillor Malcolm Richards?
Support.
Councillor Andrew Mickleborough?
Support.
Councillor Abdul Loys?
I agree.
Okay, Councillor Pauline Jorgensen?
Yep.
Councillor Carl Duran?
Support.
Councillor Gary Cowan?
Support.
And Councillor Stephen Conway?
I support as well.
Yeah, and I add my own support to that. So that planning application, just to refer back to it, 193356 is conditionally approved unanimously by the members of the committee present. Okay, we now move on to page 115. This is a planning application.
Chairman.
Sorry.
I have arrived.
Chris Lord.
Chris Barry.
Well, welcome, Councillor Barry.
I've arrived.
Thank you.
Does that mean?
We'll, just to let you know, Councillor Bowring, we've moved the Twyford one to the back of the committee, so we'll come to that in a little while. And as you know, I've asked you to chair that particular item. So could we now then move on to, as I say, planning application 193422, and this is a application for erection of a summerhouse retrospective. It's a very minor application. And just like the last planning application, it's only before us because the red line site area is greater than 1 hectare. It's not because it's a matter of great controversy. So we go straight across to the planning officer on this application, Brian O'Donovan. Over to you, Brian.
I think you may be muted, Brian.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Perfect. Just trying to get the presentation. Okay, can everybody see that?
Yep.
Perfect.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, this application, it's a land adjacent to Lake Lodge on Moorgrave Road. It's a full planning application for the proposed change of use from agricultural to personal leisure use, and it includes the erection of a summer house. The application is retrospective. The use in the summer house have been in place since the end of April 2019, so just over a year. As you can see in front of you, the site plan, it's bordered on the west by the Hennerton backwater, a tributary of the Thames, on the east by Wargrave Road. And as mentioned by the chairman, it's only in front of us today due to the site being in excess of 1 hectare. Here's the aerial photograph of the site. You can see a pond in the centre of the site, the access down the east, an existing access, and the summer house is located in amongst the trees by the northern section of the site. These are just some views across the site. The one on the left is looking from west to east towards Wargrave Road, and the one PowerPoint is looking northeast to the site. On this one, you can see the top left is the summer house, which is sited in the location of a previous pigsty from the previous agricultural use on the site. And in the bottom right, you can see looking west across the pond towards the tributary. On to the next slide, that's the existing access to the site. And just to note, the gates here have been removed as requested by the highways officer. This is the proposed site layout plan. It's not the easiest to follow, so I'll just point out the most important features. At the north of the site here, you can see the summer house, which is already in place. It's modest in size, 17 square meters, and it's sited where the previous pigsty was located. You can see here there's log piles here, and these are as part of the ecological enhancements to provide shelter for amphibians, reptiles, smaller animals. And the southwest corner of the site, we've got another area for ecological enhancement, and we've got bat boxes and bird boxes located in trees throughout the site, with a RSPB approved hedge located to the north of the summer house. Sorry, up here to the north of the summer house. Ecology officers are happy with the enhancements on the site, as are landscape officers. Here's the elevations and floor plan of the summer house. As you can see, it's modest in size, 17 square meters, with just under half of that being actually an outdoor veranda. It's relatively lightweight in materials, and it's, as noted previously, cited where there was a pigsty on the site. In terms of policy, the MPPF in paragraphs 145 and 146 allow exceptions for development in the green belt for development in relation to recreation. In that regard, we have no concerns about the principle of development, and subject to conditions, the application is recommended for approval. Thank you. See how to... So I'm just trying to turn.
Okay. Thank you for that, Brian. Can you remove the? That's it. Great. Thank you very much. So members, just to reiterate, as I mentioned in the introduction, this is only at the planning committee because the site is larger than 1 hectare. You will have read the report and seen that there are no objections, and it is in essence, a very minor application, very different from the type of application that we often face with at this committee. So I will again go through this with each member and see whether any members have any issues to raise on this. So firstly, I'll come to, sorry, somebody speaking? Seem to be getting some feedback.
Sorry, I was anticipating.
Okay, you're jumping the gun, Chris. I was going to come to you first anyway, because we're going round alphabetically back in the other order. So firstly, Councillor Bowring, any issues with this application?
I have no comment.
Thank you. Councillor Stephen Conway.
Thank you, Chairman. I have no objection to this application, other than just to observe, as everyone I'm sure will know, this is retrospective, which is regrettable, but I have no objection to the application. I'm a little concerned, however, that Chris Bowring's sound quality is rather intermittent. I hope he might be able to improve that.
Okay, well, we'll see when we get there. Councillor Gary Cowan.
Simon, no objection to this, so I'm happy to support it.
Thank you. Councillor Calderon.
Thanks, Chair. Only to say that I kind of thought from the NPPF that the allowing of recreational facilities and stuff was kind of referring to larger things, so you know, like massive sport fields and so on. But I've learned something from this application that it doesn't. So yeah, I'm in favour.
Yeah, I think this is a sort of application that if it wasn't in the green belt, probably even if it was in the green belt, but was in somebody's back garden, it would probably be considered permitted development. Councillor Pauline Jorgensen.
Sorry, I had just a question about the restricted use only for leisure. Does that include being able to change it into something you could live in overnight?
Yeah, it's a question we raised in the original briefing. Brian, could you just comment on that, please?
Yes, just in relation to the structure itself, as noted, it's a 17 square meter structure. It's about half of that is an outdoor veranda. I don't think there's really any massive scope for that structure to be a habitable accommodation at any point in the future.
Yeah, but that wasn't actually the question. We agree that it would be a shed in essence, and we wouldn't want people living in it. But in essence, I think what Councillor Jorgensen was asking was for a reassurance that this use is ancillary. And could you just clarify that, please? Because what would stop the applicant deciding to live there? I think that's what they're asking for clarity.
Okay, well, in terms of it, the use is restricted to the personal leisure use within the sui generis, so they would need to apply for planning permission if they intended to live there.
So personal leisure does not include overnight accommodation?
It doesn't include residential accommodation.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Abdul Lois.
Yes, I have no objection, Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Andrew Mickleborough.
Yes, I'm happy to support this application, but I am disappointed that it is retrospective.
Yep, okay, thank you. Councillor Malcolm Richards.
No objections, I support it.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Angus Ross.
I support.
Thank you. Councillor Rochelle Shepherd-Debay.
No objections, other than being retrospective, which no one seems to like yet, which we don't seem to like, but otherwise, no objections.
Okay, just for clarity, just remind people that there is nothing stopping someone making a retrospective application. We can't prevent them doing it, but they still do need to get planning permission, which is what's being done here. Whether they were badly advised that they didn't need it, or whether they simply didn't even cross their mind that they might need planning permission for such a outbuilding is another matter. But the bottom line is they've now made an application. We've applied the appropriate set of conditions, and I'm hearing that all members of the planning committee are happy to support that. So on the basis that all members have already indicated their support for this application, I don't think there's any need to go round a second time. Just one final question. Anybody else have any other points they would like to make to this, or would object to me concluding that you collectively agree unanimously this application can be approved? And no one is indicating, so planning application 193422 is therefore approved. Now move on to the next application, which is Ashridge Manor Garden Centre. And Brian, I think you'll be doing this application as well. So we'll go straight over to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Chairman.
Yep, we can see that. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, so this is a full planning application for the erection of a single-storey extension to the existing sales area to the garden centre. It also includes 2 roller shutters and 2 security doors. And just to note, this application's in front of you today as it's in excess of 1 hectare. Okay, so here's the overall site plan. So you can see on the cursor, this is the main building, which is approved in 2016 for the garden centre. There's a number of other buildings within the site. Here you've got a cafe, and here you've got other garden centre structures. It's more apparent on the aerial photograph here, where you can see this is the main garden centre building. This was a building that was approved in 2016, and the extension is to the south of that, which you'll see in the next or sorry, in the further plans. So here's the front elevation of the garden centre, and the lower plan is the full width of it. On the top plan, it's to the left of that structure is where the extension is proposed to be. So going on here, we can see on the left it's just an indicative aerial which was sent in by the agent, showing the extension. You can see on the actual site layout plan it's slightly wider than as shown on the aerial photograph, but in terms of the overall structures on the site, it's a very modest addition. To the plans, you can see it integrates. The top plan is the proposed front elevation. You can see on the left here shows the extent of the width of the proposed extension. It integrates with the existing structure, same material, same ridgeline. That's also seen on the rear of the proposed plans. On the next slide. So there, and again on the side elevation, you can see it integrates with the existing structure. You've got two roller shutters, which are typical features of these garden centres, with two inward opening steel doors. And therefore, subject to conditions, the recommendation is for approval. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Brian. So again, this application, I think, is a non-controversial application. If I could refer members to the first of the A3 pull-out plans at the back of this particular item, it's the plan beyond page 141, you will actually see the proposed extension marked on there in a hatched area. You'll see it's very small compared with the existing buildings that are already on site. You'll also note that it's fully policy compliant. There have been no objections from any of the consultees. And again, this is only as committee because it's larger than a 1 hectare site. I suspect it's an area of our scheme of delegation, and we'll need to look at to see whether we can actually change this to get some more appropriate size constraints, or to try and restrict this type of application actually being delayed and needing to come to the planning committee. So again, I'm going to go through we're back in reverse order again. So I'll come firstly to Councillor Rochelle Shepherd-Dubay.
I assume this is the one right next to the greengrocer part of the garden center. Because the garden center has a greengrocer on one side and the garden center on the other side, the plants and things like that behind it.
Sorry, is that a question or just a statement?
That's a question.
Okay, Brian, can you confirm that?
Yeah, it's at the southernmost point of the site, which I believe is where there's the two separate entrances. So that, off the top of my head, I can't remember which one was which, but it's at the southernmost, the furthest point as you'd enter the site.
I have no objections to the application then.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Angus Ross.
No objections, support.
Thank you. Councillor Malcolm Richards.
No objections, and I support it.
Thank you. Councillor Andrew Mickleborough.
No objections, and I support this application.
Thank you. Councillor Abdul Loys.
I have no objection, Chair, and I support the application.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Pauline Jorgensen.
I'm in favour.
Thank you. Councillor Carl Duran.
I have no comments, and I support.
Thank you. Councillor Gary Cowan.
No objection, and I support.
Thank you. Councillor Stephen Conway.
Thank you, Chairman. As you've said, this is a very minor, a minor change. There are no objections to it, and I support it.
Okay, thank you. And finally, Councillor Chris Bowring. Hello, Chris. You're muted, Chris.
He could try writing it in the chat thing if we can't actually hear him.
Yeah, Chris, you're still muted. There we go, you're unmuted.
There we are. It always takes a while to react. I don't know why. Yeah, the thing's obviously approved anyway, but I approve as well.
Thank you. Your sound appears to have improved a little. Anyway, okay. So members, yes. So members, you've all indicated that you are supporting this application. So if we could, I will therefore confirm that the planning application 200323 at Ashridge Manor Garden Centre is therefore unanimously approved by the planning committee. Thank you. We now move on to we have a footpath next, a footpath diversion, and then we'll come to the Twyford application that was deferred from the start of the meeting. So we go straight over to Andrew Fletcher. Are you there, Andrew?
I am indeed. Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Okay.
Straight over to you then.
Thank you very much. This is an application from St Nicholas Hurst Church of England Primary School to divert a footpath over their playground to the edge of the playground. I'm just going to share the presentation. There we go. And I'm hoping that's the right one. I suspect not. Please excuse me.
I think it was the right one.
It was.
It possibly was. It was. I'm hoping that's come through okay.
Yep,
yes,
we can see that fine.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So it's an application for permanent diversion under Section 119 of the Highways Act 1980. Now I will move the slide along. The current existing route runs along this solid line through their playground from School Road, and what it means is that the school is unable to secure their playground when the children are playing, because the footpath means it must be open for the public at all times of the day, and they're unable to stop anyone from walking down there with their dog, which causes a number of particularly serious safeguarding issues. What they're proposing to do is divert the path along, as you can see on the cursor, this dashed line here from B, C, D, and E, so that it avoids the playground, allows people to still use it, but allows them also to secure their playground area. It was originally subject to a diversion in 2007, where there was objections to that proposal, but the current application has now been through a number of consultation with the original objectors, and we've come up with an acceptable position. So I've got a number of photographs here where you can see the entrance from School Road and the gate, which they're unable to block, and the gate from the other side. So you can see that it does allow full access into the playground area. The gate at point B and in the report will say that there's actually two gates here because they're so close together. We have one gate into the playground. There's also a dilapidated gate here, which is virtually inoperable, that runs into the field. As part of the application, the school is arranging for that gate to be removed and replaced with a more accessible structure, along with the other gate on the other side. I've got a views of the proposed path. The actual path would be surfaced to a 2.8 metre width along here, which would make it accessible for all year use around the school. It would also remove this top rail on the fencing to give a more open aspect to the path. There was, in the report, it mentions a stile at School Road. This has actually already been removed by the school. It did used to stand here. And as part of one of the objections that was received previously was to do with the dog leg on the path. It's very difficult to remove, but what's has been done is that the application has been changed to soften that somewhat to allow a little bit more of a curved nature to the path. It's been through the initial informal consultations with various user groups. I'm just scrolling to get those details there, but no objections have been raised by the Ramblers or the British Horse Society, the Parish Council, the Local Access Forum or the Open Spaces Society. And it is recommended, Chair, that the application is approved and order is made.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Members, I think we try and get rid of that screen.
Yes, I shall do so. Just bear with me a second. Sorry. There we are. Sorry about that.
Right, thank you. Normal service is restored. So thank you, members. So this application, as you see, is again not particularly controversial. And if we make a recommendation to approve, if that's confirmed, we still have to go out to consultation, which could raise objections. But we're hoping that because this process has already been done previously, as Andrew explained, that any likely objections have already been overcome. Before I just go round the committee members, I would just like, Andrew, could you please confirm that the proposed gates for the footpath will all be disability buggy and pushchair friendly?
Yes, it will change from what was 4 structures along the path down to 2, and the gates will change to British standard compliant medium mobility, which will allow wheelchair and pushchair through.
Thank you for that. So we'll now go round again. So I think this time we're going back clockwise again. So I'll go firstly to Councillor Bowring.
No comment. Approved.
Thank you. Councillor Stephen Conway.
This seems to me, Chairman, like a very sensible solution to the problem of ensuring safeguarding of pupils at the school. But it also, with this minor amendment of removing the right angle bend at the bottom, it actually improves accessibility. So I think this is a very good solution and I support it.
Thank you. Councillor Gary Cowan.
I support the application. I'm perfectly happy with it.
Thank you. Councillor Carl Duran.
Yeah, it's a good solution and I support.
Thank you. Councillor Pauline Jorgensen.
Yes, I'm happy with that support.
Thank you. Councillor Abdul Lois.
Sorry. Oh, thank you, Chairman. Absolutely. For the safety reason, I fully support this application.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Andrew Mickleborough.
Yes, it certainly does seem to address very important safeguarding issues. I do have just one very small question, though, and that pertains to the removal of the top rail in the fence. And I'm just wondering where that decision came from, and is the school happy with that? Again, from a safeguarding perspective.
Okay, Andrew, are you able to provide some clarity on whether the removal of the top layer of the fence was something we asked for or the school has proposed?
It came from the Open Spaces Society, who requested that as one of their only concerns with the application. It was put towards the school as to whether it would be acceptable to them, and they agreed to it, so it went in.
Okay. Right. Are you okay with that, Andrew?
Yes, very. Thank you.
Okay. I think it's worth mentioning in terms of security and safety that the nature of the fence would not stop somebody climbing through the fence regardless of whether or not the top rail was there, because it's a fairly open structure, as is typical and probably appropriately characteristic of a rural location. Councillor Malcolm Richards.
Yes, it seems an eminently sensible solution, but I just have one quick question. When they do the diversion, they go around the 3 sides of the square. That becomes then the new official footpath. Do they have to go, or will they also go through nullifying the old one? They don't leave any part of the old one still in abeyance on an archive file that can be reactivated, do they? I mean, do they cancel the old bit?
Okay, Andrew, could you clarify whether the part of the if you like the redundant path, what actually happens to that? Do we go through a formal process, or does it just fall into disuse?
The way a diversion order works, it would remove the rights over the existing line and replace them and create new rights over the new line. So there won't be any legal rights over the bit that's been diverted. There'll be nothing.
So it completely supersedes the old route, and no part of the old route remains.
That's right.
That's
over the black line. Yes.
Thank you for
I'm
that.
happy with that, Chair, and I will support this.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Angus Ross.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm delighted to see this long-running saga resolved. It was something I was involved with in my executive role, tried to get through some years ago with all sorts of objections. So I'm actually delighted that the path, which has been there for a long time, can actually now be implemented, subject to us all agreeing tonight. So I approve.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Shepherd-Dubey.
As a school governor, I always approve anything that increases the safety of the children. So I agree. I approve.
All right. Thank you. And I would add my support for this application. So based on the clear indications from the members, all the members that are present, that this planning application is approved as detailed on the bottom of page 153 and the top of 154. So that recommendation is approved. Thank you for that, Andrew.
Thank you.
So we will now return to the first item, which is the Twyford application. This item will hopefully be chaired by Councillor Chris Bowring, the Vice Chairman of the committee, because I was not present at the previous meeting when elements of this were discussed. Chris, just one point from me. I think there's a quite substantial several-second delay between you switching on and us actually being able to hear sound. So perhaps you could bear that in mind during your chairing of this item. And I would also then just reiterate that should there be any technical gremlins that prevent that working efficiently, that Councillor Angus Ross would handle this item. Angus Ross, could you confirm that's okay with you as well?
Yes, I'm happy to do that. I get some delay in getting on, but I could always leave my mic on all the time.
Yep, okay. And Chris Bowring, I recommend that you leave your mic on all the time. And obviously, as is the normal protocol, that other members should have their microphones off, except when they're talking. So I'm not leaving. I'm not leaving the meeting, but I will now go mute, and we'll just watch from the sidelines. When this item is concluded, we do have a couple of summary reports on planning appeal performance to cover, and we need to check whether there are any site visits, although I'm fairly sure there aren't any. So at this stage, I'm now. Sorry, just a moment.
Can I just say, it's Malcolm, I've just received a message on my screen that says my session will time out in a few seconds. I'll have to log back in again for some reason. I don't know why. So if you can bear with me, I may or may not get cut off.
Okay, that sounds as though you're using a personal copy of Teams rather than the council's version. Okay. Is that correct? Yeah, okay, right. So with those provisos, I'm now handing over the reins of the meeting to Councillor Chris Bowring.
Thank you, Simon. I'm just trying to get my video to come. First of all, apologies for being late due to tech. Let's get the video to come. I'll do it in audio for the moment. So it's page 17, and it's the application for land to the rear of 2022 Station Road, Twyford. If anyone can't hear me, could they say? But I guess it's okay.
It was fine until a second ago, Chris. You've now stopped.
Chris, turn off video because it does demand much more bandwidth.
Chairman, may I suggest, in the meantime, whilst Chris sorts his issue out, that we head over to the case officer and let Natalie present the case. Is that okay?
Yes, sounds good. And Angus can always pick up if necessary.
Agreed.
Hello everybody, I'll just switch over to share my screen. Oops. Hold on a second. Right, this is application 192280. It's land to the rear of 2022 Station Road, Twyford. It's an application for full permission for the erection of one number bed, two-storey dwelling following demolition of the existing workshop. This shows the location of the application site to the rear of 20 to 22 Station Road. If you can see my pointer, it's located on the corner of Brook Street. The application site is located within 150 metres of Twyford train station and is located within Twyford Station Conservation Area. The area is predominantly residential, taking the form of mainly Victorian terraced housing. This is an aerial photo of the surrounding area. You can see Twyford train station up in the corner, Station Road and Brook Street. The existing building is a single-storey workshop constructed from mainly of red stock brick, similar to that of other buildings in the locality. The rest of the building is made up of exposed blockwork, partial white painted timber garage and access doors, and a corrugated and felt mono-pitched roof. Councillors have seen a number of photographs of the surrounding area, and I'm now going to show you the area using Google Street View. Please bear with me a few moments. We will start looking southerly, looking towards Twyford train station. The application is on the corner of Station Road and Brook Street to the rear of the tattoo shop. Station Road is mainly Victorian terraced housing with a couple of properties which have been converted to shops. On the other corner of Station Road and Brook Street is Twyford Police Station, which is now vacant. As we now look down Brook Street, which is a no-through road, we can see the application site on the left-hand side. And you can also see the area behind the police station, which is now vacant, but the car park area is still there. As I pan down the street, I can turn back and show you the rear of the properties on Station Road. This is the property on Brook Street, which is adjacent to the application site. Panning back round to look down Brook Street. I will turn back up. Going back up towards the application site, which is here. There's access to some of the properties on Station Road. And there's the existing access into the outbuilding. And then we're back up for a final view of Station Road. Just bear with me one moment while I go back to another screen. we should be again viewing the presentation of the item. This is the proposed site plan. So as you'll see, there's the footprint of the building there, an area of open space, car parking, and that's the end terrace property we looked at there, and that side access to the side of the building. Here's a proposed front elevation, and including a street scene as well. In terms of appearance, the proposed building would be built from brick on the ground floor and largely glazed at first floor, with the bricks around, a flat roof with metal coping detail. There is relevant planning history. Last year, planning permission was sought for a two-storey dwelling, which was refused and dismissed at appeal. The proposed site plan and front elevation are shown here. The proposed site plan, the proposed elevation. A copy of the appeal decision was attached to the agenda, and the appeal concluded that there was support for the principle of a contemporary development on this site. The inspector concluded that there was potential for an alternative option that would enable the development. The appeal inspector's decision is a material consideration that carries significant weight. There is an objection from the council conservation officer, but on balance, the proposal is considered to be acceptable. Since writing the report, there's been one further comment from a neighbour. This relates to lack of parking and there being vehicles parked at the site by the applicant and that they have not been moved. The recommendation is for approval as set out within the report, subject to the conditions recommended. Thank you. I'll pass back to you.
Chris, are you able to chair this, or do we need to pass over to Angus? I think, by the looks of it, Angus, you might need to take the chair. If I could just also, just whilst we get that done, just remind members and the public as well that there were two public submissions for this item, which have been published on the website, been circulated to members. There was one objection statement submitted by one of the neighbours, Ms Durrant, and there's also been a letter of support from the agent, Mr Thomas Rumble.
Thank you, Justin. Yes, I'll take this if Chris is not able to take part. Just before we go around, everybody, it seems to me that the three main considerations are the impact of the appeal decision, the parking issues, and then the design and impact of that design on the local area. I wonder, Justin, whether you could just add a bit to those points and maybe with the highways officer as well, and then we'll go to the local member, who's Stephen Conway.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I will, obviously, I'll leave the parking to my colleague, but we've appended the appeal decision, which is a significant material consideration. Now, the inspector dismissed the last appeal on two reasons. One was the issue surrounding the building line, and one was the use of materials, i.e. the wooden cladding. And unusually, the inspector has recommended solutions to the appellant, which were twofold, which were to bring the building line back and to change the material to glazing. Now, that is exactly what the applicant has done. I appreciate that many members may have concerns about design and its appearance and its impact on the conservation area, and that's understandable. Officers also share that concern, as does the conservation officer. However, looking at where we are in terms of the appeal decision and the clear guidance that the inspector's given and the clear intentions of the applicant to appeal the decision, our concern is that we may be considered to be unreasonable if we refuse this application, given such clear guidance from the inspector. I'll pass it back to you, Chair.
Thank you. Do we have the highways officer there, just in terms of the various issues of some of the neighbours on parking?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hi. So in terms of parking, matters of access and parking weren't reason for refusal under the previous appeal. The site has 2 parking spaces at the moment off carriageway, and that's not going to change under this proposal. All that's happening really is a little bit of the brick wall is being knocked down to make the manoeuvring in and out of the site easier for cars. Brook Street is heavily parked up at the moment. I agree, I've been out there on site myself. The access is protected by some H-bar or access protection markings, although they're slightly faded. So really nobody should be kind of parking across that sort of wider access at the moment. So in summary, no highway issues really, because there's a parking space there at the moment, and this proposal is simply making access to that parking space easier by taking down some of the wall.
Thank you, Judy.
Okay.
Stephen Conway.
Thank you very much, Chairman. And I'd like to thank Natalie for her full and very carefully balanced report. It is not easy to conduct a virtual site visits. There's inevitably some difficulties in really truly capturing character through Google Street Scene and even through photographs. What I can say is that this is a prominent site. It's not only prominent within Brook Street, but it's very, very visible if you walk up Station Road to go to the station, as of course many residents of Twyford do. So this would be visible to a lot of people. That's an important point. We did discuss this in some detail at the last committee meeting, so to try and expedite matters and to focus discussion, I would like to propose that the committee refuses this application on 2 grounds. I'm not going to include a highways reason for refusal because although I know a lot of local residents are concerned about parking issues, the expert advice we've received from Judy is very clear, and I don't think we're in any position to go against that. So I'm not going to pursue any highways issues in what I say. I'm going to focus on simply 2 reasons. The first is that the proposed new dwelling creates problems of overlooking. It fails to comply with the Borough Design Guide's requirement for a 12-metre front to flank distance. This matter was not considered at the appeal on the earlier application, but I would contend that the new fenestration exacerbates a sense of overlooking for 20 to 22 and 24 Station Road. The lower storey windows proposed on the elevation facing 49 Brook Street create a further problem of overlooking as they look out on a flank entrance. Now, it may be, of course, argued that obscure glazing will overcome this overlooking problem. I have to say, when you see a condition requiring this extent of obscure glazing, that does suggest we have a problem with the relationship with existing dwellings. My second reason for refusal is that the proposed new dwelling, by virtue of its discordant design, disturbs the harmony of the existing street scene and fails to preserve or enhance the character of Twyford Station Conservation Area, of which the site and surrounding Victorian dwellings are a part. I am aware, of course, of the inspector's comments, which colleagues may feel limit our room for manoeuvre. The applicant's agent has, with understandable relish, drawn our attention to the potential consequences of failing to take these comments into account. But rarely, and I think this is an important point, if I may say so, Chairman, but rarely, if ever, has an expert officer, our own conservation officer, so clearly persisted with objections to a scheme in these circumstances. And I think we really should note that. Whereas I don't feel we can pursue our highways objection because we have no expert advice to support us. On the issue of design, on the issue of whether this preserves or enhances the character of the conservation area, we have very clear expert advice on our side. And that expert advice coming from our conservation officer, I would contend, helps us to approach a refusal with some confidence that we would not encounter an unsustainable and an impossible task at appeal. No one, I think, could claim that our refusal was frivolous or unreasonable or lacking in substance if it were backed, as it is, by expert advice. So I would suggest that our conservation officer's strong objections and our having seen our own virtual site visits or conducted our own virtual site visit give us grounds for including this second reason for refusal alongside the first. So I propose 2 grounds for refusal for this application, and I hope my proposal will be seconded and supported.
Thank you for that, very clearly put. Before I ask the officers to comment on those proposals for refusal, can I ask if somebody would be prepared to second what Stephen Conway has proposed?
Yes.
Is that Pauline?
Yes.
Who was that said yes, please?
It was Pauline.
Pauline Jorgensen. Okay, thank you very much. Natalie, could you or Justin, could you please make your comments on this and noting that Stephen has suggested it is not a frivolous presentation or reason for refusal, even given what the inspector has said.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. As regards the first issue, the privacy and overlooking issues, I think Natalie will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that the separation distance is 11.7 metres and we require 12 metres under guidance, and that's the same as the previous application. So it's no worse than what the inspector looked at before. Now, if there are changes in the scheme, obviously you can look at that, and that may lead to a reason for refusal if there are more windows and it leads to more overlooking. The difficulty is that the flank windows that I think is the concern could quite easily be conditioned to be obscure glazed. And frankly, if the matter can be dealt with by condition, then it wouldn't stand up as a reason for refusal. So I would urge members against going down that road of refusing on privacy when actually it can be overcome. And as relating to Stephen's other point about the conservation issue, obviously the conservation officer objected to the first planning application, and that was the previous planning application. The inspector looked at that and discounted it, subject to those 2 grounds that I've discussed. So professionally, I couldn't advise you to go against the previous inspector's appeal decision. I think it's likely to be considered to be unreasonable if this scheme goes to appeal again. And I think probably at this point it's appropriate that I call on Mary if she's available to just talk about inappropriate conduct at appeals.
Mary?
Yes, sorry, good evening everybody. I have to support what Justin said. We just want to try and avoid unreasonable decisions that the applicant or the appellant could hinge a cost application against us, that's all. If Justin is advising that the reason for refusal proposed is unreasonable, then we've got a bit of a problem, so we just need to explore and talk around that a bit more.
Okay, thank you. Before I go and ask opinions of other members of the committee, and I'll start with the seconder, could I just ask you, Stephen Conway, if from what you've heard, you wish in any way to alter your 2 proposals for refusal?
Thank you, Chairman. I think it is Justin's point about the obscured glazing. I hinted at myself. I can see that would provide a condition that enables my concerns to be at least partially addressed. I don't actually think they would be removed because I feel there's something inherently wrong with an application that relies on such a large extent of obscure glazing. I think this would be not something I would. The first reason for reviews is not something I would go to the barricades over, but I do feel this is indicative of a fundamental problem with this application. I do believe in the case of what is the fundamental point, which is that this is out of keeping with and fails to preserve or enhance the character of the conservation area. I do believe we have a case, and I don't think it is unreasonable. I cannot see how it could be unreasonable if we are backed up by an expert testimony of our own conservation officer. Our conservation officer was aware of the inspector's comments when he made his current observations. So I believe this is a material consideration, and I believe it protects us from the argument that we've acted unreasonably. I do also think it is worth saying at this point that of all the issues on which an inspector could focus, design is surely the most subjective. It is possible for people to disagree what constitutes good design. And I think it is perfectly reasonable, therefore, for the committee to take a view that, given the expert advice we've got here, we could conclude that this is not something that preserves or enhances the character of the conservation area. So I'm afraid I'm not prepared to back down on that second reason for refusal. I am prepared to compromise on the first.
Thank you. Thank you very much. What I'll do is ask each person when they speak to actually make comment on both the reasons that have been proposed for refusal. Pauline Jorgensen.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I agree with Stephen. I can't see any point in having a conservation area or a conservation officer if you then completely ignore the fact that they exist when you're considering application. I understand what Justin is saying about the obscured glass and the way that would reduce the overlooking. I'm not sure that's tenable as a solution for something that has that much glass in it. The third thing I wanted to talk about, again, I know we were told by the highways officer that parking was okay because the parking was as it is at the moment. My questions on that were that the plan that was shown on the screen had 2 spaces with a gap between them, as far as I could remember, whilst the plan we've been given in the pack has got 2 spaces, both of which 2.5 metres across, but with no gap at all. And I would wonder if anybody's ever used those 2 spaces like that, and whether you could actually get out of a car if you happen to have two cars parked there. So it's all very well to say there are 2 parking spaces there already. Have we have any evidence of 2 parking spaces actually being used at the same time?
Judy, could you take that point, please?
Yeah, I think I've got photographs actually of the 2 vehicles parked in there, and obviously with the previous workshop use, some of the vehicles previously parked in there can be quite large. So it does happen at the moment. Not really quite sure how they get the vehicle into the second space because the wall is quite obtrusive. But yeah, I mean, as I said before, the proposals, the parking proposals were, as previously, that went to appeal, no objections to them, no issues. They meet the size for parking bays. So we're fairly confident they can get in and out easily enough.
Thank you, Judy. Do you have any comment on the fact our plan shows no gap between them, whilst the one you showed does?
I mean, it's not uncommon to have 2 parking spaces next to each other. So the parking space, the 2.5 by 5 meters is the full parking space, but generally the car sits within that. So there's generally enough, it's quite common in sort of residential applications to have parking spaces immediately adjacent to each other.
So which one is right? The one we've got in front of us or the one that we were shown?
Oh, I think, so I'm not quite sure which plan we're talking about here. Sorry.
I think the one that was flicked up showed 2 car parking spaces with a gap between them. And the one that's in our pack has no gap.
I might have to refer back to the planning officer as to which is the approved or the correct plan, if that's all right.
Natalie, can you help us here? And really also,
Hello. You should now be able to see the presentation. I think that's the plan.
Yeah, that's okay. That's the same. Thank you.
Okay. And the only point I would make was regarding visibility and what the inspector said about the starting point is the building that's there already. So that's the only other point that I would have added. Thank you.
So are we satisfied that on the parking then, Courtney?
On the basis of the assurances that you can get out of the car and that people have used them like that in the past, yeah, that's fine.
Okay, thank you. Right, let's go through the rest of the committee. Chris Baring, are you with us?
I don't believe so, Chair. This is Callum. I don't believe Chris is here.
Okay, thank you. Gary Cowan.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm sorry, I've got a cat who's decided to join the planning committee. I've had to move it on. Anyway, he's gone. Listening to the comments so far, what I would say is the inspector did support the council's refusal, but then unusually, by clear national policy, it's just his personal opinion. So when one talks of an inspector, if he says the rules are MTPF is this, that, or the other, in my opinion, this, if we approve this, it would destroy the fabric of the conservation area in that area. And the proposed plan does nothing positive for the conservation area, and as such, offers no public benefits to the community. I do believe, and having a conservation area in my area, I understand the importance of trying desperately hard to protect it against all the various pressures. If we allow this or approve this, then it will certainly damage the conservation area, and the beneficiaries will not be the residents. And there are times when we have to put a foot down and stand up for it. So that's my comments so far. Thank you.
Do you have a view on the overlooking, Gary?
Well, my view on the overlooking, I think the design that's put forward is horrendous, and it is really unacceptable. It's very difficult to be precise. It's just unacceptable.
Okay, thank you. Carl Doran?
Thanks, Angus. Just firstly a question, really, because I didn't quite find it in the notes in the report. Has Twyford Council actually objected to this or not? They put anything in?
Just bear with me a second.
Natalie,
I'll just
can you
check.
help us?
Bear with me a second.
No problems. Originally, in the original report, it said that we were waiting for them to come.
If I can
They were
help,
attached
they have
to it. The committee are not in agreement of the plans being approved and support the residents in their views and comments. It was one of the attachments to the committee report.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I must have missed that.
No worries.
Okay, well, kind of that just leads into what I was going to say, really, that, you know, the council are opposing it. There's a local member opposing it. Obviously, Stephen is another local member who has listed it and clearly opposes it now. Conservation officer objects. I think last time I asked a question about the amenity spaces, and they are confirmed to be understanded. Although, to take Justin's points, I mean, you're absolutely correct, Justin. I mean, you didn't need me to tell you that, obviously, but the inspector's comments, you know, are undeniably a significant material consideration. And he didn't complain about the amenity standards. I don't know why. It seems incredibly small area to me. And I take the point on the kind of unreasonable refusal, and that's something we could be accused of. But in the end, it's the inspector's opinion was, and that's the problem. In the areas where this matters, I think it was his opinion. He one of the things that was said was that he felt the site as it was more detrimental than it would be if it was developed. And I don't agree with that. And I think that's a matter of opinion. I don't think that's a matter of planning law. I think that what they put in there, it looks worse than what's there at the moment. And what's there at the moment doesn't look great. I'd agree with that. And the neighbours' objection seemed very convincing to me too, about the problems they're seeing with overlooking. Well, the other thing that confused, I mean, I've heard it from a couple of people already, the confusion about what a conservation area is for, really. I mean, in our own TB24 in the MDD, it says that, well, it requires a development to preserve or enhance the character of the area. I just cannot find it in myself to see how this preserves or enhances. I mean, it's just a straight, definite no from my point of view. Yeah, I think I agree with the reasons for refusal. I take the point that the obscure glazing could solve that by condition, the overlooking one. But I take Stephen's point as well, that if you're putting this much obscure glazing in a building, then clearly it's an indication there's a bigger problem. And the bigger problem is that it shouldn't really be there in the way that it is. So I do support the refusal. Thanks.
Thank you. The Parish Council report is on page 55, if you do want to look at it. It's at the end of the agenda item. Abdul Loyes.
Thank you, Chairman. I have read the report thoroughly, and I know there is a problem. However, I would support this application. I'll make it short due to there's nothing I can see that we can challenge if this goes against us, and that's why I'm supporting this application. Thank you.
So you're not supporting the amendment to refuse. Abdul, are you there, please?
Yeah.
I want to be clear. Are you not supporting the refusal?
You're muted, Abdul.
I'm not hearing you.
Abdul, you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Yes.
Speak up, please.
Yes, I'm in support of the application in short. Thank you.
Sorry, say that again. I can't hear.
I am in support of the application.
He's supporting the application
Right.
as is.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Andrew Mickleborough.
Yes, thank you, Angus. The many photos provided clearly show this is a conservation area of relatively unaltered terraces. WBC's own pamphlet relating to this conservation area states, quote, "It's important that all new development should be sympathetic to the special architectural and aesthetic qualities of the area, particularly in terms of scale, design and materials," end of quote. The intention in this statement is that this should apply to all sites within the conservation area. If the application was refused, I would hope that this was clearly identified amongst the reasons for refusal. I appreciate that the inspector's support for the principle of contemporary development on the site is a significant material consideration, and that the appeal decision unusually includes specific suggestions as to what might be acceptable. I also note the agent's representations on pages 17 and 18 and our officer's advice tonight with respect to circumstances comprising unreasonable behaviour. This must all be treated very seriously indeed. However, I cannot see how what is proposed would not prove to be discordant with the street scene in what, we must stress, is a conservation area. Policy CP3 states that development must be appropriate in terms of a number of criteria, including, quote, "character of the area in which it is located," End of quote. Very few people would conclude that the recommendations for changes in design made by the planning inspector significantly change the impact of the development on the character of this area. The additional large expanses of glazing on the very visible first floor would certainly be one of a number of factors drawing the eye to this structure that would continue to be about as different as possible to all other buildings in this terrace. I also treat very seriously indeed the Conservation Officer's continued objection to this development. I do have one question though, and that is, in the Planning Inspector's report, the Planning Inspector's report raises concern about infringement on the adjoining terrace's building line, creating a disproportionately jarring effect. That was the Planning Inspector's phrase. This was on page 3 of his decision. Can officers confirm if this issue has been addressed? I couldn't see how it has been addressed in the documents that we were provided with. If it hasn't, I wonder if any members think this might be an additional grounds for refusal, as well as the 2 grounds suggested by Councillor Conway, and whether these might be upheld if it went to appeal. Thank you.
Justin, I think you did refer to this at the beginning, but if you could cover it again as to whether the current application sufficiently changes that building line issue.
Yeah, thank you. It's not in your pack, but it's in the plans on the website where you can see the difference in building lines between what was refused and dismissed and what's proposed now. So yes, it's been set back by the 0.5 metres that the inspector suggested.
So in your view, that is not a continuing matter that should concern us?
Not the building line issue, no, Chair.
Are you okay with that, Andrew?
Can I just clarify, the setback of 0.5 metres, is that referring to the first floor only? Because it looks to me as though the ground floor will continue to be built right up to the pavement.
Yes, it's the first floor only.
So sorry, just to jump in on that. Obviously, that's the current situation with the garages on site.
Are you saying therefore that what is proposed is no different in terms of the ground level to what is there currently?
Yeah, I'll ask Natalie to correct me if I'm wrong, but in terms of bulk and projection beyond the building line, the residential scheme is no worse than the garage scheme.
I have got a plan that I can quickly just share to you.
Thank you, Natalie.
A second. Can everybody see that plan? The pink denotes what the old scheme and the extent of the projection, and then the excuse me, the then that shows the building line of that first floor. I don't know if that helps you.
That's a first floor diagram, is it?
Yeah, and the pink is denotes where the building line was in the previous proposal, and so it shows you how much it's set back.
So the ground floor is still where the existing one is, forward
Yes.
to the property. Okay.
Yeah. So the pink just shows the change between the appeal proposal and the current proposal. So it's set back that 0.5 metre.
On the first floor, not on the ground.
Yeah.
Andrew, is that answering your point?
It does, but my concern is that the current ground floor is a wall, not particularly up to, I don't know, shoulder height, head height, or whatever. And I think that's a very different issue, to it being a part of a residential property. So, but that's a personal point of view.
We'll leave that one for Stephen Conway to comment on when I get back round to him after everybody's spoken. So, Malcolm Richards.
Yes, thank you, Chair. This is quite a difficult one, really, because two or three things I don't like about it, but parking has been addressed because there is already a dropped curb there, and there's parking on that pavement. So they've addressed the parking. They've addressed the other points that the appeals person said should be changed. It's not a wonderful looking building, but then the existing one isn't much better either. However, they have moved the line back on the first floor, which is a partial change. So they've addressed some of the concerns and complaints about people, but it hasn't changed a lot. I don't think I can complain that it's a really ugly building. It's not wonderful, but the existing one's not much better. What concerns me more is the fact that there's all that glass on the first floor, and you can't obscure all of it. It's going to look like a very strange glass house with obscured glass all around. It's not very practical. You can overcome the overviewing by having obscure glass in certain parts, but you couldn't do it to the whole lot. So it looks a bit odd. I can't say it's ugly because that's down to individuals' perception. They've addressed some of the points. What concerns me is that if we reject it, it'll, from what I understand from the officers' presentations, we'd be on thin ice, really, because they've addressed the changes, and it doesn't break all the things. Most of it is to do with its appearance, I think. Parking seems to have been addressed, other addresses, and I think we might be on thin ice if we reject it again. And if it's rejected again and they go back, I imagine we could be stuck for some costs. So at the moment, I think reluctantly or on balance, I might well have to reject it, but I will reserve my judgment until a couple more people have spoken.
Sorry, reject what? Because we're discussing the amendment to refuse the application.
Yeah, I'm tempted to refuse it for the reason that earlier on that it would be looked on as I don't know, petty for us to reject it when all the things that were wrong would appear to have been addressed by the applicant in terms of parking and various other bits and pieces. So
we'll take a vote on it, Malcolm, but what I'm hearing you, if I'm correct, is that you're not supporting the amendment.
I'm likely to reject the application is what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying.
And you are supporting the amendment?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, sorry. I just want to be absolutely clear there. Anyway, we'll come to a vote in due course. So, Rachel.
Okay, if you go to complete conservation, you'd have to remove all electricity from all the buildings. You have to remove all of the TV antennas. You'd have to remove all of those downstairs windows and all the shops there. It's getting to be completely crazy. We're not pickled in aspic. We don't have to say keep it exactly the same. The same excuse has been used over and over again to refuse solar panels and to refuse interesting ideas which might reduce climate change. So I'm in favor at this point, and considering that the inspector has said that he has no objections to the design, that's precedent. It doesn't have to be in the NPPF. It's precedent by the inspector. They will use that, and the inspectors usually tend to go with precedent. We will lose this appeal if we reject it, period, based on what the inspector said, based on what the officers said, and based on the fact that we shouldn't just have conservation for the sake of conservation. We're not a museum. We're a modern country which has to do that. We'd have to change all of the buildings in London back to where they were and change everything else back to where it was. And doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Thank you. I'm not in favor of rejecting it.
Thank you. Very clear. Stephen, you've heard people comment on your proposal, which was to refuse this application on 2 grounds. Do you wish to sustain both those reasons before we take a vote?
Thank you very much, Chairman. First of all, I should say that the parking issue is not one I've raised. The building line issue that Andrew brought up has been actually addressed, and I think that's an issue we can pursue. I think the overlooking, which does concern me, I believe that it would be, given that we could condition this by putting in skewer glazing, no doubt that reason for objection would be overcome, although I personally believe there's an inherent problem with any new dwelling that has so much obscure glazing that suggests there's an inappropriate relationship. I don't think it's sustainable for me to pursue that objection. However, I am, I'm afraid, going to stick to my guns on the conservation area issue, and I have to, I'm afraid, disagree very strongly with my colleague Rochelle on this. She clearly opposes the idea of conservation areas full stop, but this is a conservation area. It has a status as a conservation area, and it has to be taken seriously. It is an historic note, those shop windows that she referred to as alterations, they're not alterations. Photographic evidence shows that Station Road was used as a shopping for local shops from the Victorian period. So before this was designated a conservation area, those shop windows existed. So I'm afraid there is, the two of us won't agree on that issue, but I really do think, for the reasons I've said, that we have a case which is supported by expert advice, and I would therefore propose that we limit our reason to refusal to that, my original second reason for refusal. The proposed new dwelling, by virtue of its discordant design, disturbs the harmony of the existing street scene and fails to preserve or enhance the character of Twyford Station Conservation Area, of which the site and surrounding Victorian dwellings are a part. And it's worth reminding ourselves of the fundamental point that of all the things that are surely subjective, design is the most obviously subjective. It is possible for people to have different views on this, and I think we, with the expert advice we've got to support us, it would be, I think, difficult to sustain the case that it would be frivolous or unreasonable, or our reason for refusal lacked substance. So I would, with my seconder's permission, like to just limit my reason for refusal to that one about its failing to preserve or enhance the character of the conservation area. I hope that clears things up and clarifies things, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. Before I ask for a comment by Justin on your proposal, can I ask the seconder if she's happy that we have just that second reason for refusal as proposed by Stephen Conway?
Yes, I'm happy to support that, although if this is approved, and if therefore as a condition for obscured glazing, I would suggest that any windows that are overlooking any of the areas mentioned should be therefore fixed rather than opening as well.
Thank you. Justin, could you therefore comment firstly on what conditions would apply on the overlooking and the demonstration, and then secondly on the reason for refusal and what will happen if the committee went through with that?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. In relation to the conditioning, we would, I think, probably tweak that condition that we've already got on there, which requires obscure glazing to include obscure glazing on the flanks. I think that would perhaps help with Stephen's concern. In relation to the substantive reason, I do completely appreciate the concern of members who are looking towards an alternative recommendation. I think as officers, if we felt we had a reasonable chance of appeal, we would have refused it under delegated powers, and you probably wouldn't have this application before you tonight. That's our concern. I'll pass it back to you, but perhaps does Stephen want me to clarify some wording that he might like to use, or shall I come back to that?
Could I just ask a question?
Just before you do, Justin, could you just, if we were to agree to refuse on that second issue, how would what we've been talking about of condition of administration, as it were, get into the system?
Where an appeal is submitted, we would, without prejudice, put forward a list of proposed conditions. So our conditions would include the ones that you see in the agenda, and we tweak that to clarify that we want the flank windows obscured.
And would you also tweak it to make sure the flank windows were not openable?
Yeah, up to a high level. So it's normally 1.8 meters above.
Yeah, that would be fun.
Chairman, may I just come in at this point? Justin, I think, was suggesting that if I persist with the second reason refusal, he would like to suggest a form of words that might, in his view, I think be better suited to defending this appeal. I'll be very happy to hear those and happy to adapt my reason for refusal to fit in with what he thinks would give us the best chance. So I'm very happy to listen to those and respond as favourably as I can.
Okay, just before we ask Justin that question, Callum, do you have clearly written down the original reason for refusal presented by Councillor Conway?
I believe so, but it would be helpful if Stephen could just one more time just go through it, just so I can make sure.
I'm slightly confused. Do you want me to go through my original reason for refusal or my current?
Your current one, please.
My current one. Well, I think this may be replaced by wording that Justin's about to provide. So I'm happy to actually substitute his wording if his wording meets my my objectives.
Okay, Justin.
Yes, thank you, Stephen. I've only tried to capture what you were saying. So I think you mean the proposed development by reason of its stark form, siting, and discordant design within the street scene result in significant harmful impact on the character of the area, failing to preserve or enhance the special architectural and historic character and appearance of the conservation area, contrary to policies CP1, CP3 of the core strategy, and TV24 of the MDD local plan and the borough design guide and MPPF.
That of course is exactly what I was trying to say, but said far more elegantly than I managed. I'm very happy to use that wording as my proposed reason for refusal.
Thank you very much for that, Justin. Unless anybody has a burning question, I would like now to go to the vote on the amendment, which is to refuse this application. So I'll just leave it quiet for 10 seconds if anybody wishes to add anything further. Silence. Therefore, I will put to the vote to the committee that the application be refused as proposed by Councillor Conway, seconded by Councillor Jorgensen. The second reason, which I'll ask either Justin or Callum to read once more so members are totally clear what they're voting on, and then we'll go through the names and have a vote.
And thank you, Chairman. I'll say again, the proposed development by reason of its stark form, siting and discordant design within the street scene would result in significant harmful impact on the character of the area, failing to preserve or enhance the special architectural and historic character and appearance of the conservation area. And the proposed development is therefore contrary to policies CP1 and CP3 of the core strategy, policy TV24 of the MDD local plan, borough design guide, and the MPPF.
Thank you very much indeed. So members, you're voting on a proposal to refuse the application. Therefore, make it clear we're not voting on what is in your agenda. So we'll go in reverse order. We'll start with Rochelle Shepherd-Dubé.
Against the refusal.
Against. Thank you. Malcolm Richards.
Support the refusal.
Andrew Mickleborough.
Support the refusal.
Thank you. Abdul Lois.
I'm in favor of the application. Thank you.
So you're against refusal. Thank you. Pauline Jorgensen.
I'm in favour of the amendment to refuse.
Thank you. Carl Doran.
I support the refusal.
Thank you. Gary Cowan.
I support the refusal.
Thank you. And Stephen Conway.
It won't entirely surprise you to learn that I support the refusal also.
We have to go through the formality. Thank you.
Angus, sorry, it's Callum. It's Callum. Just to confirm that I'm assuming Simon's abstaining from this, just for the record.
He has not taken part, therefore, in effect.
That is correct. That is correct.
And I assume that Chris Bowering. Thank you very much, Simon. And I'm assuming that Chris Bowering has not been present for the whole event, therefore cannot vote. Unless you can tell me otherwise, Chris. Right. Therefore, 6 votes to 2, the application is refused for the reason given and very clearly expanded for the record by Justin. So thank you very much indeed for that. I think we got through that more easily than I feared. So back to you, Simon, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Angus, for diving in at short notice to handle the contentious application that we now have made a decision on. So the only item remaining is just to go through. You will have all received your members' updates, obviously, some little while ago, on Monday, I think it was, is to go through a series of appeal decisions are there on pages 9 to 12 of your members' update. I hope you've all seen those. There are 7 appeals here, 4 of which were dismissed. I have to say, we normally, as a council, as a planning authority, we normally have a slightly better success rate of finding that appeals are dismissed. But in the particular cases here, you will have noticed that the majority of these are for single dwellings. 2 particularly I would draw your attention to is the second item, which is land off Coombs Lane. You'll be aware of a certain amount of controversy over sections of woodland that were sold there, and a variety of new owners of woodland were attempting to do different things with that woodland. And we'll see in this particular case, despite our refusal, the planning inspector was in fact happy to support our refusal, and refers to the harm to the protected trees and to protected species in particular. The other one I would draw particularly to your attention is the 5th one down, which is land off Mymar Ride, which is my own ward, and this was a proposal to build 118 dwellings approximately to the west of California Country Park in Backland. And you will see the inspector, after a quite detailed public inquiry, has come across and said quite clearly that the proposal is not for sustainable development. The transport choices are extremely limited and would generally be by car, and that we harmed the character of the area and the green route and landscape. So I think those are the ones I particularly wanted to draw to your attention. Do members have any comments on any of the appeal decisions before we move on to enforcement? Okay, in that case, I'll just move on to the enforcement element.
Sorry,
sorry, Angus.
I managed to get my mic on. Just in relation to the appeal system, sounded slightly concerning that the major appeal in Finchampstead, the other one, is now going to be completed by written representations. Have you got a view on that?
Yes, myself and the executive member and the relevant ward members were consulted on this several weeks ago. This was because the public inquiry had to be abandoned due to the pandemic restrictions. And it was eventually agreed, I would say reluctantly, by the Borough Council that we would have preferred it to continue as a public inquiry, but we thought it would be diplomatic to hand the final decision to the planning inspector. And this was the planning inspector's preference. And I suspect that is because he will be able to make progress on it without this being held up for an unknown or a period way into the future, because nobody knows when we'll be able to start having regular planning meetings again. So yes, we were consulted on it, as obviously was the applicant, and the conclusion was that whilst our preference was for continuation of the temporarily halted inquiry, that we would accept the planning inspector's decision, which I believe will put us in turn in a good light with the inspector.
Thanks for that. It might be interesting.
Sorry, I missed that. Angus, could you say again?
Sorry, just wondering if Justin could tell us at some point, maybe on an email, whether there are other appeals that are going the same way.
And I'll just do it very quickly, Angus. There's a few inquiries and hearings that are being effectively held in abeyance for the time being because they just can't get a date. We are one of a number of authorities, with this situation, and the inspectorate are being slightly slow in looking at technological changes that will facilitate an event such as this. But we unfortunately, as Simon said, we lost the argument on the Gladman's appeal because we'd have been more than happy for it to continue as an inquiry.
Thank you.
I would also just add that I had a number of emails from some of the Wokingham residents who attended that inquiry, and they, I have to say, were universally very positive about the entire council team, from our QC and including all the relevant planning officers and experts involved. They thought that we were conducting ourselves in a very professional fashion, and were putting a lot of effort into the appeal, which they obviously hope in the long term produces the result that would be supported by residents and the council alike. So if I could now just come on to the pages 11 and 12 of your members' update, you'll see the references to the number of cases on hand in terms of enforcement. I don't think there's anything of great significance to draw to your attention here, but I would say that at the moment, of course, enforcement officers are not making site visits to look at sites of proposed concern, but they will not be forgotten. And in due course, when appropriate conditions apply, these will all be followed through, of course, as normal. And the only other comment I would make is, of course, that a lot of construction projects, whether these are things that might be dependent on the appeals we've just been discussing, may well be put on ice for quite some time, because the resultant recession following this pandemic will inevitably have a quite significant impact on the rate of new property building. So anyway, I think that's all I have to say. Does anybody wish to question any points on the enforcement element of the report that you have on pages 11 and 12? Right, I see no one indicating. So That, I believe, draws us to the close of the meeting. Justin, I understand there are no recommendations for site visits for the extraordinary general meeting that we have next week. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. So, members, you will have hopefully received your hard copy agenda today. I'm still repairing the damage to the floor when it came through my letterbox earlier. It's quite a substantial tome, and I would ask you to make your way progressively through it so that you're all ready for the next planning committee, which is a week tomorrow. I have also asked that, due to the backlog, due to the March meeting being cancelled, if we are obliged to, at a date later in the year, to have another extraordinary planning meeting or an extra planning meeting as a result of the backlog, that we will ensure that there's a 2-week gap between them rather than the current 1-week gap that we have with this one. So, members, I would thank you for your perseverance. It wasn't that controversial an agenda overall compared with some. We've still managed to do it in 2.5 hours, and I thank you for that. We have 7 items on the next agenda, I think it is, and I think you will find that some of them are, to put it mildly, quite meaty applications, and I'm sure we'll have a lot to talk about. So in the meantime, I thank you for persevering with the new technology and thank the officers for the detailed presentation.